Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Patti Brennan Show. Whether you have $20 or $20 million, this show is for those of you who want to protect, grow, and use your assets to live your very best lives. Joining me today is our recurring guest, Gregg Stebben. Gregg has been on our show more than any other guest because he is so good at what he does. He is a journalist. He has interviewed presidents. He's interviewed incredibly famous people. And I can't tell you how lucky I feel and blessed that Gregg carves out time to talk to me and all of you on subjects ranging from what's it like to run a small business, how you doing during COVID, what's this going to look like afterwards. So, Gregg, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, Patti, it is great to be here, and I want to make sure the point gets made that among the amazing people I've had a chance to interview, Patti Brennan was one of them,
Oh,
and it was a remarkable interview. So you rate right up there at the top of the list, and I'm thrilled to be here again today because the last time you and I talked was about 9 months ago. I think it was in August of 2020. We
yes,
were in the
sir.
middle of the pandemic and the lockdown. And I mean, look, I don't mean to suggest by anything I say here that we know exactly how this is going to end even now. But back then, there was an awful lot of unknown and fear. And I was in the middle of a life transition. I was literally sitting in an empty house. All I had was a folding chair and a folding table in my podcast studio because when we were done with the interview, I folded the table and the chair up, put them in a truck, and my wife and I moved away. So I now live a completely different life in the mountains than I did 9 months ago. And I know lots of other people have lives that are very different too. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about how those changes are going to continue coming and what they're likely to look like and how we should both mentally and I think financially prepare for them because we're seeing all kinds of things like supply chain issues, worker shortages. What do I do in my life and in my business about vaccines, whether I want to be vaccinated or the world tells me I have to be vaccinated or I don't want to be around people who aren't vaccinated. Those are the kind of issues I'm really excited to talk with you about today.
And Gregg, I have to tell you that it was so great to have you on the podcast throughout all of that because you were so wonderful to be so open and transparent and share with all of us what you and Jody were thinking about, what you were going through, how that period of time really gave you guys the opportunity to say, what do we want our lives to look like? Like, do we want to continue on this treadmill that we've been on? And you made some really tough life choices that led you to this point where you are today, led you to that chair and table in with your podcast with us last August and in your new home in the mountains, living the life that you had dreamed of. So thank you for sharing all of that with all of us and really circling back as you are to check in and say, how's it going? You know, I mean, that was you made some major changes.
Well, so first of all, last August when we last talked, my wife and I owned a large, beautiful house on a busy street in Raleigh, North Carolina. Raleigh just this week was named the top 2 city in the country to move to.
Mm.
So lots of growth and activity there. We lived on a pretty busy street, and according to the city, 30,000 cars a day drove past our house.
Wow, talk about a
Today,
180.
yeah, today we laugh and say 3 cars a day drive past our house. We're living in the mountains of North Carolina near the border of Virginia and Tennessee, and life is literally completely different. It was going to be completely different because of COVID anyway. And I can honestly say, and I don't mean to discount other people's experiences who had really terrible hardships and can maybe even continue to have hardships because of COVID. I don't mean to discount the illness and the death at all. But for me, this was one of the best years of my life. And I think the slowdown in our lives because of the lockdown really enabled us to take the time and get the perspective. And what I'm really focused on now is really looking at things that can help people have the best year of their life going forward. What are the consequences of COVID that have changed the world around us that people can really take advantage of? And I think one of those circumstances, if you're really smart about it, is taking advantage in the change in the climate around employment today. I know that the worker shortage is a problem for a lot of businesses, but I think there was a story in the Wall Street Journal last week about how, for whatever the temporary pain may be, even for businesses, the end result may be a wonderful thing. You just have to be patient and roll with it, like we've been rolling through this COVID thing for the last 18 months.
I couldn't agree with you more. It is giving all of us the opportunity to step back and say, gee, what really makes sense going forward? I have a small business, I have 30 employees. Our culture and our business is dependent on clients who trust us to monitor their financial affairs. Now, in our business, it is, we've kind of got a unique culture where we can just stand up and say, hey, what's going on with John and Mary Smith? Or I see an opportunity for a tax benefit for this particular client. Can you run the following numbers this way? So it's a really collaborative type of atmosphere. And I will tell you, Greg, during the lockdown, that was really much harder to do. It still got done, but it was much clunkier. So in terms of productivity, the ability to serve our clients, yes, it got done. It actually took longer to get the same outcomes. Now, here I am, the CEO of this business, and to your point, and I'm just kind of reading your mind a little bit, we're all kind of looking at this and saying, gosh, it sure was nice being able to work out of the house. It sure is nice not having to deal with that commute. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both the office environment and the remote environment. And each business and each person has to make choices that are going to work for them. It might be dependent on your age, what season of life you're in. You may have kids at home. It's hard for young families to do this work thing, showing up in the office every day. And I think that if anything, for me, and I can just speak for myself, Greg, I've become much more cognizant of what our young families go through. And I can also tell you that for me as the owner and the CEO, I have learned a lot and been, hopefully much more open, and frankly am much more open to people just kind of, look, this is okay. Our office hours theoretically are 9 to 5, but it doesn't mean you have to show up 9 to 5 every single day. And by the way, life happens. Take care of your kids. If you want to bring your kids in, we could have 15 kids working here, doing their homework with mom and dad doing their thing and standing over shoulders from time to time. I renovated. We have an amazing kitchen. We've got ping pong. We've got lots of fun stuff. So it's very interesting how this culture has kind of evolved, not in reaction, but frankly because of COVID and because of the lockdown. And it's just made me as a human being more aware of, what might make it more fun, make it more attractive to come into the office so that people can do what they do in less time than it might take if they were remote. I think that that's the key here is win-win. What works for everybody, because we are a team. I'm reminded of what Simon Sinek said. He said, a team is not a group of people who work together. It's a group of people who trust each other.
Mm.
And that's a very big difference. And that's what I found during the whole lockdown. I'm so proud of how everybody rallied. It was just amazing. And I'm grateful. I can't begin to tell you how grateful every single day, every single week, I was thanking one person or another for going above and beyond and not hyper-focused on, the hours in 9 to 5, going out of their way when it really mattered. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's probably a really long-winded answer to your question. But I do think that for many people, it has given them the opportunity to say, what works for me in my work life? How can I continue to contribute to the place that I call my work home, while at the same time being true to my heart, true to my family, and live the life that I want to live?
And I think that's a big part of what this Wall Street Journal article was driving towards, is that even though it may be hard to hire people today, as people are asking those questions of themselves, where should I be? Both in terms of what should I be doing and what's the kind of company that I want to work for. I think over time, what companies are going to find is that the people that go to work for them stay longer, have more of their heart in it, because they really chose it instead of just taking something. I think the lockdown for a lot of people gave them a chance, just as I did, to say, wait a minute, what is it that I want here? And I'm curious to know, in you and your team's conversations with your clients, do you hear your clients having those same kind of conversations with themselves, with their partners, and even with their kids?
Absolutely. I do think that this is giving everybody the opportunity to sit back and say, okay, what are my alternatives? This works for me. This is not working as well for me. And where do I go from here? Not only what can I afford to do, but where will I be most productive? Where will give me the most opportunity to be my best self and to make the biggest contribution. And when you're making a big contribution to an entity, whether it be a business or a corporation, I can't help but think that that's going to be win-win for everybody included.
I think one of the things that this period of COVID did was make us all stop and understand and appreciate the humanity of all, not just ourselves or maybe the people in our small bubble. And I think seeing people's expectations change, really reset, so that, for instance, if someone promises you something and they come back and they say, because of supply chain issues or because of worker issues, I'm just not going to be able to provide that in the time that I promised. I promise I'm going to provide it, and I promise I'm going to provide it as soon as I can. But circumstances beyond my control make it impossible for me to deliver the way I did before the whole COVID circumstance began.
You've brought up a great point. Those unmet expectations, those disappointments. That's a tough piece of news to deliver to a client or a customer that you cherish. And yet that's the practical reality of what has happened. And to me, ultimately, it's all about communication. It's about transparency. It comes from the top, Gregg. Here's what's happening. Here's why it's happening. We're going to work like the dickens to fix this as quickly as possible, and we're going to do it together. And if leadership, if senior management sends that message to their frontline workers, because it's the frontline people who are delivering that information and that bad news, and for those people to know that they're supported, that's a kind of place where people want to work. They're proud, they feel empowered, they feel understood, and they don't feel like they're so alone. We deal with that, frankly, every time a bear market occurs. And it's really tough. We get more phone calls, people are worried, and I'm not answering all of those calls. It's funny because we had a new employee during March and April, and I found myself going into their office and sitting down and saying, "Welcome to your first bear market." And it won't be your last. So how can I help you? What questions are you getting? This is tough. These are difficult times because we can't guarantee the future. We don't know for sure what's happening. And it's important that it's okay to say that.
I think part of what you just said was that in the world of Key Financial, there's really two essential constituents or sets of stakeholders. I think in a lot of businesses, there's really only one set of constituents or stakeholder, and that's the customer, the person who opens their wallet and buys something or subscribes to something or becomes a client. But in your world, and I know this was true long before COVID, there were two sets of constituents. There were the clients, of course, but equally important, and it was important and essential to make the machine run the way it does, was that your employees are a set of constituents that are every bit as important as the clients themselves. And that's, I believe, has always been the culture that you created. And I think you should take some credit for that. I think you went through COVID very well because you built an organization the right way. And so you were prepared for anything. Typically a bear market, in this case, a pandemic. And who would have ever expected that except maybe someone who had once been an ICU nurse?
Maybe, maybe. And for whatever it's worth, and I'm glad you brought that up, I'm kind of winging this, Greg. I have no training in management, in, business, or even leadership. I think that for me, I just kind of want to put myself in that person's position and go back to the days when I was that person talking to that client, and client after client, day after day. You get that compassion fatigue, and for them to know that I understand and to give them tools to get through it. I'm just doing what I would want if I were in their position, because at the end of the day, they are the company. In fact, that's
Yes.
one of the things that when I hire someone new, there are 10 statements that are typed out that I want this new employee to read, to understand, and then they sign it. And one of those statements is the following: to the client, I am the company. So it's that sense of ownership. And with ownership also comes empowerment, to give them the freedom to do what they believe in their heart is in the best interest of that client. At the end of the day, and I don't know how this is going to come across, but yes, I do believe in hiring really smart people with great pedigree and background, etc. And frankly, that is probably the last thing I look for. What I look for is heart. Because when you have heart, when you really care, when you've got empathy, when you put yourself in that person's position, it's amazing the things that will happen. Because people will do things for people that they love, that we care about. We'll do things and go above and beyond far more than if this was just, a number. If people were calling an 800 number and et cetera, that's not what we are, and that's not how we will ever be.
Mm. I actually want to change gears on you a little bit and take advantage of your previous experience as an ICU nurse, because I'm sure your perspective on COVID is very different than the perspective most of us have. In fact, I remember in one of our early conversations, I told you how afraid I was of being ventilated and said, I don't think I would ever do that if I got COVID. This is when it seemed like everybody was going to get COVID. And you talked me off the ledge about ventilators, and you really convinced me that if I ever reached a point where I needed it, it was going to be okay. You've been through these kinds of life-threatening circumstances professionally in the ICU. And so one of my questions for you is, because it gets back to this whole issue of your employees and your customers and your culture and taking care of people and making them feel empowered. How are you and your employees dealing with the issue of vaccination?
Oh boy, that is a great question, because there's a lot of controversy still to this day about vaccinations. And some people have very strong opinions about vaccinations. So here's the deal. We have 30 employees. I will tell you that everybody has gotten vaccinated, but we had, frankly, one holdout. So it was important for me to understand what they were worried about. At the end of the day, it comes down to listen, listen, and listen. And so I sat down with this person and I just basically was curious, because I was curious. What was it that was preventing them from getting this vaccine that according to all the statistics, is life-saving. It would prevent them from getting what could be something that could kill them. What was it that they were worried about? And so to listen to what they were worried about, what they had been reading, articulating it, I actually made them feel a little bit better and said, I can certainly understand how you might feel, because we really don't know the long-term impact of getting the vaccine. It may not show up right away, but it could show up in 6 months, a year, etc. So I can understand that. And I could also understand because this person was relatively young. So they didn't feel that they were as much at risk. And so I listened and I took it all in. And I kind of gave it maybe a different perspective. I talked a little bit, I'm going off the top of my head here, Greg. I talked a little bit about other decisions and other choices that they make that also carry some risk. Even something as simple as driving to work that morning. More people die in car accidents every year than they certainly do from a vaccine. How do they feel about getting into their car in the morning? And I gave a couple of other examples of choices we all make that carry risk to it. And then I went in and I said, and I just said, I'm kind of scared. I just remember, and I also, frankly, I shared some of my experiences at the bedside with people who were gasping for air. I got to tell you, Greg, there is just nothing worse than seeing somebody gasp for something as simple as air with their eyes bugging out, freaking out. And by that time, when they become hypoxic, which means they're not getting the oxygen that they need, what happens is they're not perfusing their brains with the oxygen, so panic sets in. Carbon dioxide builds, panic sets in, and they're getting even more anxious, agitated, etc. And there's not, excuse my French, but there's not a goddamn thing we can do. That is the most awful experience anybody has to go through. And it happened to people of all ages. The disease, this virus just was random. Yes, we can look at statistics, but all you have to be is to be that one 32-year-old woman who was pregnant, who decided to go on her last vacation with her husband down south, caught the virus, ended up on a ventilator, on ECMO. They delivered the baby, and she died. Now, why did that have to happen to her? She was perfectly healthy. Nothing wrong with her. We had a 48-year-old person here locally. Same exact story. Perfectly healthy. A marathon runner died from this random thing called COVID. And I just said, I pray to God you never get it. And I pray to God you're not one of those people. And by the way, there's this thing called the vaccine. So you might want to keep it in mind. The statistics on side effects of the vaccine are really good, and the effectiveness is better than any vaccine that we've seen in our lifetime. So just want to let you know, if you don't want that to happen to you, there is a solution. I also want you to understand that there are people. We understand the effectiveness of the vaccine right now. Is it 100%? No, there is no vaccine that's 100%. So as the CEO of this company, I really have to think about your safety, the safety of all of our employees, and the safety of everybody who comes into this office. And it worries me if we might have somebody who may be an asymptomatic carrier, gives the virus to someone else, and that person perishes. If that happened, I got to tell you, I would never be able to live with myself. The guilt and that knowledge. Now, granted, would they definitely trace it back to the one employee who didn't get vaccinated? I don't know, but we would know. And sometimes that's all that matters.
And you wouldn't want to live with just thinking it could be when there was a fairly small thing you could do to prevent it.
Right. They got the vaccine 1 week later. So it's just, again, I did not want to make this person wrong. That's the one thing I was very careful about. I didn't want to make that person wrong because they had their beliefs, they had their feelings, they had done their research, and some of what they said was quite rational. So I could understand that. So I kind of got on the same side of the table and said, like I said earlier with you, let's figure this out together. Pros and
Hmm.
cons.
Well, and that leads me, I think, to my last question, and that is in the world of key financial, because it's such a hot topic for all businesses today. What happens next in terms of remote work, hybrid work, back to the office? How's that going to work for your company? And do you have any advice for other business owners and people who are employees who are struggling with their own company's policies?
It's I will tell you that like everything else, we are figuring it out as we go along. Now, sometimes it's hard to be a parent and sometimes it's hard to be a leader. And for me, I have to make some tough decisions, tough choices. And I'm taking it kind of day by day, week by week. We still continue to have a flexible approach to this whole thing called remote work. And I will tell you that we have a much more flexible approach to showing up every day, what's going on at home, running out in the middle of the day, etc. I think I may have said this to you last year when we were going through it, but my feeling is I don't care when the work gets done, I just care that it does get done. And I've added another statement to that. And that statement is of the same standard and quality that makes Key Financial what it is today.
Hmm.
Because I'm not going to we can't sacrifice that for convenience. So that's the spirit of all this. Everybody gets it. They're on board with it. And what's really interesting about it is they appreciate it. They understand. I wear my heart on my sleeve, Greg. I just give it to people straight. I'm transparent. I wish I could just say, hey, go off, do what you want when you want it. It's okay. I want everybody to like me. I want everybody to love Key Financial and working here. Unfortunately, as with anything, there's just stuff that has to get done, and some of it does get done in the office. Ours is a relationship business. It is so important that our clients who have trusted us with their entire life savings know we are here. Most of the work that we do is behind the scenes. We are available whenever they need. And that face-to-face interaction is often really important, especially when people are going through difficult times. Now, I will tell you that the Zoom meetings have been working out fantastically. I think that clients appreciate that. They kind of appreciate not having to come into the office. And so for existing clients who have already know us, trust us, and just need an update, we check in from time to time, that works out really well. So that has given us another way of providing a valuable service and maintaining the relationship without necessarily having, the individual being in the office in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
It's so interesting, Patti, when you talked about this conversation you had with your employee who was reluctant to get vaccinated. What you said was you listened, you listened, you listened. And what I hear you saying over and over again, and this has been true since the first time I met you, and it's been a few years now since our first meeting, is that I think that is absolutely one of the things you do best. And I think it's one of the things that makes you and your team so good at what you do is that it's really a core value for you and for Key Financial. I know that as things change, you have said right here, you're figuring it out as you go. Of course, you're figuring it out as you go. We don't know where it's going to go next. But I know that what you're going to continue to do and what your team is going to continue to do because of your leadership is you're going to listen, listen, listen to the people around you. That's your clients, that's your employees, that's fellow coworkers, and also, in a sense, have your ear to the ground and be listening to what's happening in the world around you so that you can make the best possible decisions in the moment in a world that is ever changing.
Absolutely. I think that's what we do. That's what we have to do as human beings, and we're all in this together. I think you've brought up a really important point, and that is, you know, I mean, look at Jamie Dimon. He's trying to figure it out. Big companies, Google's trying to figure it out,
Yes.
right? So everybody's kind of in the
McDonald's
same.
is trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and ultimately, those business models have to figure it out for themselves, right? McDonald's, they may or may not be able to have remote workers making burgers, right? I don't know that
Could be a
that's
problem, but they could have one remote workers inside the talk box, and that person serves 100 different locations. And have they tried that? There's no reason why they couldn't.
And that is a really good point. Isn't it amazing the creativity of some businesses and what's happening? We did a podcast earlier today, and it was so much fun, Greg. I wish you had been on it because it was really a blast. And basically, I was talking about the before, during, and after COVID. And I had 4 of our employees here from diverse seasons of life, from a recent college graduate to a young father to a mother of 3 boys, and someone who has 4 children and is an empty nester. So we had 4 of them, and I wanted to find out what were some of the establishments that they would go to, whether it's restaurants or retail stores or even the mall, right? What did they do before? How did they adjust during COVID, and what are they doing now? And the coolest thing that I learned from these 4 people, Greg, was the importance of relationships. It was amazing. For example, the stories these guys came up with. There was the talk of a restaurant here locally that, my employee really went every once in a while. During COVID, however, they had developed this system of a walk-up window, a drive-up window, easy, contactless, etc. And they got to know those people, and now they go there all the time. So the adversity, the difficulty, this restaurant got creative, found a solution, and as a result, their business is booming. So I think that, as with anything, we all will look back and say it was the most difficult time. It was also what an amazing time for growth, and what an amazing time for perspective, for us to figure out what does life look like for the next year, 5 years, 10 years. Because ultimately, it's about choice. It's about what you want to have happen. And Greg, I can't think of anybody that I know who is a better example of that than you.
That's very kind of you to say, but I would say, frankly, the same thing about you. So I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have this chance to come back and talk with you about life at this stage of the pandemic. Let's hope that we're on the long tail and it's going to go away forever. It has really been a pleasure to talk with you, Patti. Thank you for inviting me back.
Thank you, Gregg Stebben. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to go to our website at keyfinancialinc.com. I love to hear your comments. I love reading your questions. We have the Ask Patti Brennan series that is specifically designed to answer the questions that you're sending to us. Again, Greg, thank you for joining us, and thanks to all of you who continue to tune in. And by the way, always keep in mind, if you have questions, we've been doing this now for a couple of years. There's 80 episodes on topics ranging from how do I teach my kids about money, to what is this thing called a yield curve, to what's going on in the market. You can get super technical. For example, why is the Federal Reserve printing so much money and what's that going to lead to fun stuff, right? What to do in the event of an emergency. So go to the website, check out the podcast, reach out to us. We are here for you, and I'm so grateful to all of you for tuning in today. Thanks so much. Have a great day.